The wind howled across the Montana plains with a vengeance that Jake Sullivan had never experienced in his 34 years of ranching. The blizzard had hit without warning, transforming the familiar landscape of the Double Bar Ranch into an alien world of white fury. What should have been a routine cattle check had become a fight for survival. Jake pulled his worn Stetson down tighter against the driving snow, squinting through the whiteout conditions. His horse, Thunder, a reliable quarter horse who had carried him through countless storms, had stumbled into a hidden gully an hour ago. The fall had been bad. Thunder's right front leg was clearly broken, and Jake had been forced to make the hardest decision a cowboy could make. The single gunshot still echoed in his mind. Now, on foot and miles from the ranch house, Jake trudged through knee-deep snow, his boots feeling like blocks of ice. His thick sheepskin coat, soaked through from the melting snow, clung to his body like a frozen shroud. The temperature had dropped to what felt like 20 below, and the wind cut through him like a blade. "Come on, Sullivan," he muttered through chattering teeth, his breath forming ice crystals in the air. "You've been through worse than this." But even as he said it, Jake knew it wasn't true. This was the worst storm he'd ever seen in these parts. The snow was coming down so hard he couldn't see 5 feet in front of him. The familiar landmarks, the old oak tree, the creek bend, the rocky outcrop, had all disappeared into the white void. His fingers, even inside his thick leather gloves, had gone numb an hour ago. His feet weren't much better. Jake knew the signs of frostbite, and he was walking a dangerous line. If he didn't find shelter soon, he might not make it through the night. The irony wasn't lost on him. Jake Sullivan, who had been born and raised on this land, who knew every inch of the Double Bar Ranch like the back of his hand, was lost in his own backyard. The storm had disoriented him completely, and the familiar trails were buried under 3 feet of snow. As he pushed forward, Jake's mind wandered to the warmth of the ranch house where his housekeeper, Maria Gonzalez, would be keeping the fire burning and the coffee hot. He thought about his foreman, old Pete, who had probably organized search parties by now, but in this weather, even the most experienced riders wouldn't venture out until the storm passed. The wind picked up again, nearly knocking Jake off his feet. He stumbled, caught himself, and kept moving. Stopping meant death, and Jake Sullivan hadn't survived this long by giving up when things got tough. He had inherited the Double Bar Ranch from his father 5 years ago after a heart attack had taken the old man suddenly. It had been a struggle to keep the ranch profitable in an increasingly difficult market, but Jake had managed through sheer determination and hard work. The ranch employed 12 full-time hands and supported several families in the small community of Copper Falls, but none of that would matter if he didn't make it home. As Jake crested a small hill, fighting against the wind that seemed determined to push him back, he heard something that made him stop dead in his tracks. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks on his ears, a sound like crying, carried on the howling gusts. He stood perfectly still, straining to listen. There it was again, faint, but unmistakable, the sound of a baby crying. "That's impossible," Jake said aloud, his voice barely audible over the storm. "There's nothing out here for miles." But the crying continued, coming from somewhere ahead and to his left. Jake changed direction, following the sound with the desperation of a man who had been given new purpose. The cry was weak, almost lost in the wind, but it was definitely there. As he pushed through a particularly deep drift, Jake spotted something that made his heart skip a beat. In the distance, barely visible through the swirling snow, was the dark outline of a structure. It looked like an old cabin, probably abandoned, but it was shelter. The crying was coming from that direction. Jake forced his frozen legs to move faster, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The cabin was farther away than it had appeared, and by the time he reached it, he was stumbling with exhaustion and cold. The structure was indeed old, a one-room log cabin that had probably been built by homesteaders decades ago. The door was slightly ajar, and snow had blown inside. Jake pushed it open and stepped into the relative calm of the interior. The crying was louder now, and definitely coming from inside the cabin. "Hello," Jake called out, his voice hoarse. "Is someone there?" In the corner of the cabin, partially hidden behind an overturned wooden crate, Jake saw a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, lay motionless on the floor, her body covered by a thin blanket. She was clearly dead, her skin pale and cold. But beside her, wrapped in what looked like a man's heavy coat, was a baby. A little girl, no more than a few months old, crying with the weak, desperate sound of a child who had been alone for too long. Jake knelt beside the infant, his hands shaking not just from the cold but from the shock of the discovery. The baby was alive, but barely. Her lips had a bluish tint, and her small body was trembling with cold. "Oh, God," Jake whispered, gently lifting the child. "How long have you been here, little one?" The baby's cries intensified as Jake held her close to his chest, sharing what little warmth his body could provide. He looked around the cabin, trying to piece together what had happened. There were signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, scattered belongings. On the floor near the woman's body, Jake found a purse and identification. The woman's name was Sarah Mitchell, age 23, from Billings. There was a photo of her, holding the baby, both of them smiling. A happy moment frozen in time, in stark contrast to the tragedy that had unfolded in this remote cabin. Jake knew he had to act fast. The baby was hypothermic and needed immediate medical attention. But the storm was still raging outside, and he was just as lost as before. Now, however, he had a purpose beyond his own survival. This innocent child was depending on him, and Jake Sullivan had never failed anyone who needed him. He wrapped the baby more securely in the coat and held her close, feeling her small heart beating against his chest. The crying had stopped, but Jake wasn't sure if that was a good sign or a bad one. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he whispered to the child. "I'm going to get you home, I promise." As he prepared to leave the cabin and face the storm again, Jake realized that finding this baby might have saved both their lives. The need to protect her had given him the strength and purpose. He needed to keep fighting when his own will to survive had been failing. The blizzard was still raging outside, but Jake Sullivan now had something more important than his own life to protect, and that changed everything. Jake stepped back into the howling wind, clutching the baby protectively against his chest. The infant had stopped crying, which worried him more than the crying itself. He could feel her small body shivering against him, and he knew time was running out. "Stay with me, little one," he murmured, tucking her deeper into the folds of his coat. "We're going to make it through this." The storm seemed to have intensified, if that was possible. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked Jake off his feet with each gust. Snow pelted his face like tiny bullets, and visibility was down to maybe 2 feet. But something had changed in Jake's demeanor. The desperation was still there, but it was now tempered with fierce determination. He had to think. The cabin had been northeast of where he'd lost thunder, which meant Jake tried to orient himself, using the wind direction and the slight downhill slope to guide his way. If he was right, the ranch house should be roughly 3 miles south-southwest from their current position. 3 miles, in normal conditions, it would be a pleasant walk. In this blizzard, carrying a hypothermic infant, it might as well be 100 miles. Jake began to move, fighting against the wind and snow. Each step was a monumental effort, but he forced himself to maintain a steady pace. The baby was completely silent now, which terrified him. He stopped periodically to check on her, relief flooding through him each time he felt her small chest rising and falling. About an hour into their journey, Jake's legs gave out. He fell to his knees in the snow, the baby still clutched protectively in his arms. The cold was winning, and he could feel his body beginning to shut down. His vision was blurring, and he was having trouble thinking clearly. "No," he said fiercely, forcing himself back to his feet. "Not now, not when she needs me." The baby stirred slightly, letting out a weak whimper. The sound galvanized Jake, reminding him of why he had to keep going. He thought about Sarah Mitchell, the young woman in the cabin. She had obviously died protecting this child, and now it was his turn to carry that responsibility. As he struggled through another deep drift, Jake began to talk to the baby, as much to keep himself alert as to comfort her. "You know, sweetheart, I always wanted kids. Had a wife once, about 5 years ago. Rebecca was her name. beautiful woman. But she couldn't handle the isolation of ranch life, said it was too lonely, too hard. Jake paused to catch his breath. Maybe she was right. But I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. This land, it's in my blood. The baby seemed to respond to his voice, settling more quietly against his chest. Jake continued walking, using his voice as a lifeline against the encroaching cold and exhaustion. Your mama, she must have loved you very much. Must have been trying to get you somewhere safe when the storm hit. I'm sorry I couldn't save her too, little one. But I promise you, I'm going to get you home. The landscape around them was completely alien now. The familiar features of the ranch had been transformed into a white wasteland. Jake was navigating, purely by instinct and hope, praying that his internal compass hadn't failed him. Then, through the swirling snow, he saw something that made his heart leap, a fence post. Barely visible but unmistakably part of the double bars north pasture fence. He was closer to home than he had dared hope. We're almost there, sweetheart, he told the baby, his voice cracking with emotion. Just a little bit further. Following the fence line, Jake pushed forward with renewed energy. The fence would lead him directly to the ranch buildings, and from there, he could see the lights of the house. He had to. The baby's life depended on it. As he struggled along the fence line, Jake's mind began to wander. The cold was affecting his thinking, and he found himself imagining what would happen once they reached safety. Would the authorities come for the baby? Would she be placed in foster care? The thought of handing her over to strangers after what they'd been through together felt wrong somehow, but those were problems for later. Right now, all that mattered was survival. The fence seemed to go on forever. But Jake knew it was probably just the cold playing tricks with his perception of time and distance. He had walked this fence line hundreds of times, and he knew exactly where it led. Then, like a miracle, he saw them, lights in the distance, warm and yellow against the white fury of the storm. The ranch house, finally within sight. Jake wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. Instead, he stumbled forward as fast as he could manage. The baby still clutched against his chest. The lights grew brighter, and he could make out the familiar shape of the main house with smoke rising from the chimney. Maria, he shouted, though he knew his voice would be lost in the wind. Pete, I'm here. As he approached the house, the front door burst open. Maria Gonzalez, his housekeeper, stood silhouetted in the doorway, her face a mask of worry and relief. Jake, Dios mío, we thought you were dead. She rushed toward him, then stopped short when she saw the bundle in his arms. What is that, a baby? Get Doc Henderson on the phone, Jake gasped, stumbling toward the house. Emergency. Hypothermia. Now, Maria helped him inside, where the warmth hit him like a physical blow. His legs finally gave out, and he collapsed onto the living room couch. Still holding the baby protectively, old Pete rushed in from the kitchen, his weathered face creased with concern. Jake, boy, we were about to send out search parties. What happened out there? Found her in an old cabin, Jake managed, his teeth chattering violently. Her mother didn't make it. The baby, she's been out there for hours. Maria had already called the doctor and was now bringing blankets and warm towels. Dr. Henderson lived only a few miles away, but in this storm, it would take him time to reach the ranch. We need to warm her up slowly, Jake said, his medical training from years of treating injured livestock kicking in to fast and will shock her system. Maria began preparing a warm bath while Pete helped Jake out of his frozen clothes. The baby was wrapped in warm blankets, and Jake could see some color returning to her tiny face. She's going to be okay, Maria said softly, gently touching the baby's cheek. You saved her life. Jake, as Jake held the baby close, feeling his own body beginning to thaw, he realized that something fundamental had changed. This wasn't just about rescuing a stranger's child anymore. In the space of a few hours, fighting for both their lives against the Montana winter, a bond had formed that he couldn't explain and didn't want to question. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the warm ranch house, two survivors held onto each other, having found something neither of them had been looking for, but both desperately needed. 3 days later, the blizzard had finally passed, leaving the Double Bar Ranch buried under 4 feet of snow. The Montana sun shone brilliantly against the white landscape, creating a world that sparkled like diamonds. Inside the ranch house, Jake sat by the fireplace, holding the baby girl who had become the center of his world. Dr. Henderson had arrived the night of the rescue and confirmed that both Jake and the baby would recover fully. The child, whom Jake had been calling Angel for lack of a better name, was healthy and strong despite her ordeal. She had taken to the bottle immediately and seemed to thrive under the constant attention from Jake, Maria, and the ranch hands. Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived that morning, his 4-wheel drive truck equipped with snow chains for navigating the treacherous roads. Tom had been the law in Copper Falls for 15 years, and he and Jake had been friends since high school. "Jake, I need to ask you about what happened out there," Tom said, settling into the chair across from the fireplace. He was a big man with graying hair and kind eyes that had seen too much over the years. Jake carefully adjusted the baby in his arms before responding. "I found her in the old Henderson cabin, about 5 miles northeast of here. Her mother was already dead when I got there." "Can you describe the scene?" Jake closed his eyes, reliving the moment. "The woman was young, maybe early 20s. ID said Sarah Mitchell from Billings. There were signs of a struggle, furniture overturned, belongings scattered. It looked like she was trying to protect the baby." Tom made notes in his small notebook. "Any idea how long they'd been there?" "Hard to say. The woman was frozen, but in that cold, it wouldn't have taken long. The baby was hypothermic but alive, so probably not more than a few hours." Maria brought coffee for the sheriff and hot cocoa for Jake. The baby stirred in his arms, making small content sounds that had become music to Jake's ears. "I've been in touch with the Billings police," Tom said. "Sarah Mitchell was reported missing 3 days ago by her roommate. Apparently, she'd been having problems with her ex-boyfriend, Danny Morrison. History of domestic violence, restraining order, the whole 9 yards." Jake's jaw tightened. "You think he's responsible?" "We're looking into it. Morrison's been missing since around the same time as Sarah. His truck was found abandoned about 10 miles from here, stuck in a ditch. We think he might have been chasing her when the storm hit." The baby made a small crying sound, and Jake automatically began rocking her gently. The motion seemed to calm her immediately, and she settled back into sleep. "There's something else," Tom continued. "Sarah Mitchell's roommate says she didn't have any family. Parents died in a car accident when she was 18. No siblings. No relatives that anyone knows of." Jake looked down at the baby, a protective instinct rising in his chest. "So what happens to her?" "Well, that's what we need to figure out. Child services will have to get involved. They'll probably place her in foster care until they can find a permanent home." The thought of strangers taking Angel away hit Jake harder than he expected. Over the past 3 days, he had fed her, changed her, rocked her to sleep, and walked the floors with her when she was fussy. She had become as much a part of his life as breathing. "What if I wanted to keep her?" Jake asked. Quietly, Tom looked up from his notebook, surprised. "Jake, are you serious? Taking care of a baby is a full-time job. You've got a ranch to run." "I've been thinking about it. Maria's here during the day, and I could hire additional help. Angel doesn't have anyone else in the world. We've been through something together, Tom. I can't just hand her over to strangers." Maria, who had been quietly listening from the kitchen doorway, spoke up. "I think Jake would make a wonderful father. You should see him with her. It's like he was born to take care of her." Tom studied his friend's face carefully. "Jake, this isn't a decision you make lightly. Adoption is a legal process that takes time. There are home studies, interviews, background checks, and you're a single man trying to adopt an infant. The system usually favors married couples." "Then I'll fight the system," Jake said firmly. "I saved her life, Tom. I carried her through that blizzard when we were both dying. That has to count for something." Later that afternoon, Jake found himself in the barn, showing Angel to the horses while she slept peacefully in his arms. Thunder's empty stall reminded him of the sacrifice he'd made during the storm, but it also reminded him of the miracle he'd found. Old Pete joined him, leaning against the stall door. "You know, Jake, I've been watching you with that little girl. Never seen you happier." "I know it sounds crazy," Pete, a bachelor cowboy wanting to adopt a baby. But I can't explain it. She feels like she belongs here. Maybe that's because she does. Pete said simply, sometimes life has a way of giving us what we need, even when we don't know we need it. That evening, Jake sat in his study, researching adoption laws on his laptop while Angel slept in a makeshift crib beside his desk. The process was indeed complex and would likely take months, but Jake was determined to see it through. His phone rang, interrupting his research. It was Tom Bradley. Jake, I've got news. We found Danny Morrison's body about 2 miles from where you found Sarah and the baby. Looks like he got caught in the storm and froze to death. There's evidence he was tracking Sarah, probably planning to hurt her. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. So Sarah was running from him when she got trapped. That's what it looks like. She probably thought that old cabin would provide shelter until the storm passed. She died protecting her daughter, Jake, and now that daughter is alive because of you. After hanging up, Jake looked down at Angel, who was sleeping peacefully. The full weight of what had happened was beginning to sink in. Sarah Mitchell had died trying to protect her baby from an abusive ex-boyfriend. The storm that had nearly killed them both had also been their salvation, stopping Morrison from completing whatever violence he had planned. Your mama was a hero, Jake whispered to the sleeping baby, and I promise you, I'm going to make sure you grow up knowing that. As the fire crackled in the fireplace and the Montana wind whistled softly outside, Jake made a decision that would change his life forever. He would adopt Angel, no matter how long it took or how many obstacles he faced. She had saved his life just as surely as he had saved hers, and he wasn't about to let anyone separate them now. 6 months had passed since that fateful night in the blizzard. The Double Bar Ranch had transformed from a bachelor's retreat into a home filled with the sounds of a growing child. Angel, now 11 months old, had become the heart of the ranch community. She crawled around the house with confidence, charmed every ranch hand who walked through the door, and had formed an unbreakable bond with Jake. But the legal battle for her adoption had proven more challenging than Jake had anticipated. He sat in the office of his attorney, Robert Chen, a sharp lawyer from Billings who specialized in family law. The walls were lined with law books, and the desk was covered with documents related to Angel's case. Jake, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, Robert said, removing his glasses and rubbing his eyes. The state is pushing back hard on your adoption petition. They've found a family in Denver, the Hendersons. They're in their early 30s. He's a doctor, she's a teacher. They've been approved for adoption and are specifically interested in Angel. Jake felt his world tilting. But she's been with me for 6 months. She knows me as her father. That's exactly what we're going to argue. The psychological evaluation Dr. Martinez conducted shows that Angel has formed a primary attachment to you. Removing her now would cause significant trauma. Jake thought about the previous evening when Angel had taken her first steps across the living room, straight into his arms. The memory of her proud giggle and the way she had clung to him afterward made his chest tight with emotion. What's their argument against me? Robert consulted his notes. Standard concerns about single-parent adoption, your work schedule, the isolation of ranch life, lack of female role models. And this is the big one, questions about whether a cowboy can provide the educational and cultural opportunities a child needs. That's ridiculous. Angel will have everything she needs here. Maria is like a grandmother to her, and there are plenty of strong women in our community. As for education, we have excellent schools in Copper Falls, and I can provide for her college education. I agree, but we need to prove it. The hearing is scheduled for next week. We need character witnesses, documentation of your financial stability, and evidence of the strong community support system you've built around Angel. That evening, Jake sat on the porch with Angel on his lap, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink. She was babbling happily, pointing at the horses in the nearby pasture and saying "Dada" with increasing frequency. Maria joined them, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She's getting so big, she said, settling into the chair beside them. It's hard to believe she's the same tiny baby you carried through that storm. Maria, I need to ask you something. The adoption hearing is next week, and I Need you to testify about Angel's life here. Are you willing to do that?" Maria's face grew serious. "Of course, Jake. This is her home. You are her father. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you together can see that." Over the next few days, Jake was overwhelmed by the support from his community. Old Pete volunteered to testify about Jake's character and his dedication to Angel. Dr. Henderson provided medical records showing Angel's excellent health and development. The local school principal, Sarah Williams, offered to speak about the quality of education available in Copper Falls. But the most unexpected support came from Sheriff Tom Bradley, who had been investigating the case from the beginning. "Jake," Tom said, stopping by the ranch the day before the hearing, "I've been thinking about the situation. I want to testify on your behalf tomorrow." "Tom, I appreciate that, but you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I've seen a lot of families in my 15 years as sheriff, and I can tell you that what you and Angel have is special. She belongs here, and anyone who says otherwise is blind." The courthouse in Billings was packed on the morning of the hearing. Jake sat at the plaintiff's table with Robert Chen, while the state's attorney, Patricia Morgan, represented the Department of Social Services. The Hendersons, the prospective adoptive parents, sat in the gallery with their own attorney, Judge Helen Rodriguez, a respected family court judge with 20 years of experience, presided over the proceedings. Angel sat quietly in Jake's arms, occasionally babbling and playing with the buttons on his shirt. "This hearing will determine the custody and adoption of the minor child known as Angel Doe," Judge Rodriguez announced. "The state has petitioned to place the child with approved adoptive parents David and Susan Henderson. Mr. Sullivan has counter-petitioned to adopt the child himself." The state's case was methodical and professional. Attorney Morgan presented evidence about the Hendersons' stability, their experience with children they had to older adopted children, and their financial resources. Dr. David Henderson testified about their ability to provide educational opportunities and cultural enrichment. "Your Honor," Dr. Henderson said, "we can give this child everything she needs: a stable-to-parent home, excellent educational opportunities, and the resources to pursue any interest she might develop." But when it came time for Jake's defense, something magical happened. The courtroom filled with voices from the community that had embraced Angel as one of their own. Maria testified first, her voice strong and clear. "Your Honor, I have worked for the Sullivan family for 8 years. I have watched Jake raise that baby with more love and dedication than I have ever seen. She is happy, healthy, and secure. This is her home." Dr. Henderson spoke about Angel's medical care and development. "Mr. Sullivan has never missed an appointment, never failed to follow medical advice, and has provided excellent care. Angel is thriving under his care." Old Pete's testimony was simple but powerful. "Your Honor, I've known Jake Sullivan since he was a boy. He's got the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. That little girl lights up when she sees him, and he'd move mountains for her. That's what being a father is all about." But the most compelling testimony came from Sheriff Tom Bradley. "Your Honor, I was the investigating officer on the case that brought Angel into Mr. Sullivan's life. I've watched their relationship develop over the past 6 months, and I can tell you without reservation that this is a father and daughter who belong together. Jake Sullivan didn't just save Angel's life that night, she saved his too." When it was Jake's turn to testify, he spoke from his heart. "Your Honor, I never planned to become a father, but when I found Angel in that cabin, something changed in me. She needed me, and I needed her. We've been through something together that created a bond I can't explain, but I know it's real. I love her as much as any biological father could love his child." Judge Rodriguez asked, "Mr. Sullivan, what would you say to those who argue that a ranch is no place to raise a young girl?" Jake looked down at Angel, who was sleeping peacefully in his arms. "I'd say that this ranch is a place where she'll learn the value of hard work, the importance of caring for others, and the beauty of the natural world. She'll have the freedom to explore, to learn, and to become whoever she's meant to be. Most importantly, she'll have a father who loves her unconditionally." The judge called for a recess to consider her decision. Jake waited in the hallway, surrounded by his supporters from Copper Falls. Angel had woken up and was playing peekaboo with Maria. her laughter echoing through the courthouse. When court reconvened, Judge Rodriguez's decision was clear and decisive. After considering all the evidence and testimony, I find that the best interests of the child are served by granting the adoption petition to Jake Sullivan. While the Hendersons are undoubtedly good people who could provide a loving home, the evidence shows that Angel has formed a primary attachment to Mr. Sullivan, and that removing her from his care would cause significant psychological harm. The courtroom erupted in applause from Jake's supporters. Jake felt tears streaming down his face as he held Angel close, officially becoming her father. However, Judge Rodriguez continued, I am ordering ongoing supervision by the Department of Social Services for the next year to ensure Angel's continued well-being. 1 year later, Jake stood in the same pasture where he had nearly died in the blizzard. Angel, now walking confidently and chattering in her own language, toddled through the grass chasing butterflies. She had grown into a happy, confident toddler who owned the hearts of everyone at the Double Bar Ranch. The social worker had completed her final visit the week before, officially closing the case. Angel was legally and permanently Jake's daughter, and the Double Bar Ranch was officially her home. As Jake watched his daughter play, he thought about the series of events that had brought them together. The storm that had nearly killed them both had also given them each other. Sarah Mitchell's final act of love had been to protect her baby, and now that baby was growing up surrounded by love and security. Dada, Angel called out, running toward him with her arms outstretched. Jake scooped her up, spinning her round as she giggled with delight. What do you think, sweetheart? Jake asked, pointing toward the mountains in the distance. Should we go check on the horses? Angel clapped her hands excitedly. Horses, horses. As they walked toward the barn together, Jake reflected on how completely his life had changed. He had gone from a lonely bachelor cowboy to a devoted father, and he couldn't imagine life any other way. The Double Bar Ranch was no longer just a place where he worked, it was a home, where he was raising his daughter, surrounded by a community that had embraced them both. The storm had passed, but the love it had brought into his life would last forever. Jake Sullivan had found his family in the most unexpected way, and he would spend the rest of his life grateful for the night he heard a baby cry in the wind.